and welcome back to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy Podcast. My name is Charles, and with me today, as always, is my lifelong friend and co-host, Dylan.
I'm ready to talk some fantasy with my friend, Charles.
I am ready to talk some fantasy with my friend as well, Dylan, but not just any fantasy today, because we're busy going along our reading schedule. We just recently read and discussed A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, and we're now underway reading Assassin's Apprentice by Robin Hobb, book one of the Farseer trilogy. But while we're doing that, the show must go on, and Dylan. It must. And Dylan, you've done some extra curricular reading that you're ready to bring to the table today. Is that correct?
Yes, this is not just your everyday curricular reading. It is extra. And I went to the bookstore and I saw a really cool looking cover, and
it is a
I
great
was
cover.
like, yeah, it caught my attention. It's a paperback version, I believe, is a reprint of The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor, and it's just got this like giant looking octopus that's got its like tentacles curling around the title of the book. It's nice color. It's just very, very cool. So
yes, the
that caught
octopus
my
looks
attention.
like a mountain also.
That's true. That should be mentioned. And the premise, when I checked it out, looked interesting. It's, I think, pretty well received in terms of awards, which I'm sure we'll get into. And yeah, I thought, you know what? I'm just going to throw this on my own personal reading schedule. It's one of those that you don't even know about, and then somehow it hops to the top of your TBR because it just catches your attention. So,
Right.
Yep. Sorry, Brent Weeks or whoever that I've been meaning to read. The Mountain in the Sea became my next read out of nowhere.
It surprised me too. I didn't even know you were reading it until I saw you mention it on social media, and I was like, "Oh, interesting." Okay, and the cover grabbed me. It looked very cool. The art style is almost like your scientific textbook illustration kind of art style, but then it's very, very colorful as well. So I was like, "Oh, that's kind of cool." And so I'm really curious, to learn more about it because I have no idea what it's about. I haven't done any research, and I'm also curious to find out how good it was.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I ended up giving it 4 stars on Goodreads, which is right around the average rating, and it's 4.02 or something. So it sounds like I had a generally positive reaction that aligns with most folks, or at least the aggregation of most folks' reactions. And I have a lot of positive things to say because, like I said, my reaction was mostly positive. I have a couple things that I was like, oh, it could have been even better here. But I do recommend this book, especially for folks who hear the premise and find interesting, which I'll get into. And then, we'll see where people land after I give this spoiler-free sort of review of the book. And I think this is one that a lot of folks would really enjoy. But I think this will be a good episode for determining who those people are, because I feel like I can get into all these great aspects while also being like, and here are the things that might make this not for you. So sometimes we become this like just, raving about everything that we completely adore about some book. And I think this will be a little bit more balanced while being generally positive.
Well, I'm excited to hear about it. Let's go.
All right. Well, I guess I should mention book is the winner of the 2023 Locus Award for Best First Novel.
Wow.
So this is a debut for Ray Naylor. I believe he's written some short fiction. It's also a finalist for the Nebula Award and a finalist as well for the Los Angeles Times Ray Bradbury Prize. So this is kind of near future sci-fi. We cover both sci-fi and fantasy, even if we lean a little bit fantasy on Friends Talking Fantasy. And just to give a little bit of background about the author, Ray Naylor, who wrote this book that heavily features octopuses, which, by the way, we're going octopuses. We're not going octopi. All right? I'm just saying that right now. Yeah.
Get used to it,
They
people.
go octopuses in this book. And I feel like that's what the real ones do. The people who know about octopuses, I've Googled it, and I'm like, like it says octopi is also acceptable, but the real ones, the OGs, they say octopuses. So I want to be cool. I'm going to say octopuses. So
if the book says it, then I think we have to say it, regardless of our own opinions on the matter. You know, I think I would agree, though. Octopuses is the way to go. I feel like octopi, you're just trying too hard. You know.
Yeah. So he currently serves, Ray Naylor, as the international advisor to the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. So this is a guy who knows his octopus, all right? Octopuses. And it's interesting. I think you get to learn a decent amount about octopuses if you're not plugged into that scene as much. And anyway, near future sci-fi. I'm going to give you a slightly edited version of the premise from like Goodreads or wherever I grabbed this. Humankind discovers intelligent life in an octopus species with its own language and culture and sets off a high-stakes global competition to dominate the future. The transnational tech corporation Dyanima has sealed off the remote Kondal archipelago where this species of octopus has been discovered. The marine biologist Dr. Ha Nguyen who has spent her life researching cephalopod intelligence, will do anything to study them, travels to the islands to join Diana's team, which consists of her, a battle-scarred security agent, and the world's first and possibly last android. You got androids in the mix. The octopuses... Right. The octopuses hold the key to unprecedented breakthroughs in extrahuman intelligence as Dr. Nguyen struggles to communicate with them. Forces close in to seize the octopuses for themselves. But no one has yet asked the octopuses what they think or what they might do about it. And that's the premise that grabbed me. I think this premise, the ideas explored in it, those are the strengths of the book, the themes as well, which I'll get into.
Mm-hmm. I like the premise.
Yeah,
I find that like octopuses have been like just
they're having a moment.
They're having a moment. They're like captivating like the hearts and minds of the people in recent history, because there was that Netflix documentary,
My Octopus Teacher, which I also watched. I'm on an octopus kick.
You're on an octopus kick. Nice. So there's the Octopus Teacher. There's a couple other different things about octopus. There's just something like kind of interesting about them, fascinating about them, and it makes me wonder, like, why haven't we seen more octopus in fantasy? You see like Cthulhu and some of that stuff, which is octopus adjacent, but to actually embrace the octopus as a like a theme in your fantasy or sci-fi story, I guess. It's somehow unique, but also like well constructed, right? It's like, oh, I have a sci-fi book about the sentient consciousness of an octopus, and use that, and then I'll also have androids and scientific research, and it's like it's an interesting premise. It's a good pull of different kind of things in the popular zeitgeist to kind of make your niche story. It's kind of impressive how he drew that niche out for himself.
For sure. It's unique, and octopuses, they're ridiculously intelligent already, which is kind of more recent that people have really started to appreciate that. I'm sure people who study them have always known this. But yeah, things like My Octopus Teacher, which I highly recommend over on Netflix. And you get to like really see how smart they are. They do some wacky stuff. Or there's videos that you can find on YouTube of them like they'll like leave their tank at an aquarium and like go eat a fish from another exhibit and then come back and like close the tank behind them. So it's like they do these wacky things but they're like made of goo. Like they're not which is not the scientific way of describing it, but like most most animals that we consider like very intelligent, they're like dolphins, which are fellow mammals and stuff. But like octopuses, they have like more going on in terms of their like nerve cells or whatever, like their equivalent of neurons or what have you. They have more of that going on in their tentacles than they do in their brain. And their tentacles like act kind of like without even their brain always telling them what to do. Like they basically, and they do these wacky things. Like they'll disguise themselves as stuff. Like my octopus teacher has like really wacky film of them doing that to like try to hide from a shark and stuff. So they're like, octopuses are having a moment. I'm glad you're plugged into that, Charles.
I've noticed it.
Yeah,
it's like a vein within popular culture. It's not crazy prominent, but it's there. Like that Finding Nemo sequel featured the octopus and the octopus teacher. All these other things. I'm like, they're having a bit of a moment. I didn't know that the tentacles kind of acted independently to the brain. It's kind of like me when I'm around chips, It's just like the hands just start grabbing and putting them in my mouth. My brain's not even realizing, hey, that's more than a serving. You should probably stop.
That's amazing.
So I can so I can relate in that way. We're kindred spirits almost.
You definitely can, and that's, I think, why the octopus is the choice for Ray Naylor here, because of its the ways in which we can totally see ourselves in them and their intelligence, right? This idea that we could like go try to do something that we know is kind of bad and then like hide it by closing the lid of our tank behind us. Like, oh, yeah, like no one will, like we see ourselves in that, or in our decision to eat, or not decision, our lack of decision to eat a ton of chips when we don't even realize it. Like we can see ourselves in them, but they're also so alien to us despite their intelligence, and that's like a huge thing here that's explored, because the themes are mostly about like consciousness, and we've seen that explored so many times with the like AI characters or androids, which we do have featured in here. Like it's easy to think of, do androids dream of electric sheep once that starts to get involved? But the octopus as the subject,
where the robot just starts singing a song as it gets turned off, and you're like, I kind of feel bad now.
Yeah,
it was evil, but
yeah, 2001 classic. Saw that relatively recently, so I do know what you're talking about. And Hal is the name, if I remember correctly.
Close to Pod Bay doors, Hal. I'm afraid I can't do that, Dave.
Fantastic. Check it. If you're like me and you haven't seen this classic yet, then check it out. But
Stanley Kubrick.
Anyway, we see these themes of consciousness, like I'm saying, but the octopus is a new and unique way of exploring that, where you kind of get to dive into it's like the androids and AI stuff. It's usually about like, how can we take this thing and make it as similar to humans as possible? But what Ray Naylor can do with the octopus is kind of like emphasize the unfamiliar as well, in a way where you can try to like remove yourself from our there's a word for it, but like human-centric way of viewing the world, and be like, oh wow, like an animal that's like made of goo, and they are gooey. They're not.
They are very gooey. You see them like
squishy
videos of like going through like a little pipe or something. They can or like small rocks. They can just kind of squish in there. They're made to do that.
Yeah,
they can squeeze through insanely small places.
Yeah, like the only real hard part of them is their beak. Like everything else is just like basically goo. But it's like an animal that has this kind of experience, like it would be so drastically different than our own. And then what if they gain sentience? Like what would that even look like? And how could they communicate? And and what is our responsibility to them? Which to me, like we've explored that so much with like, what's our responsibility to sentient robots? How do we know if they're sentient? Is like, all right, that's like heavily treaded ground. And it's actually, that's explored well in this too, because we do have that android character. But it's like, oh, this is entirely unique while getting into these themes that are like so much in the public consciousness, especially because AI also having a moment like octopuses.
Oh yeah,
and
AI having a way bigger moment, dude. Way bigger.
It's close.
But it's what's also interesting is that like with androids, the theme is always like, well, are they like at what point are they alive? At what point are they conscious? With octopuses, they are alive, like they're living creatures. And then there's this almost like this environmentalism component to it of like, we're not the only living beings on this planet, and now we may not be the only living intelligent conscious beings on this planet. And when technology has us come to the table and have like more like next level interaction with another living species, it almost becomes like alien, even though it's the creatures that have existed on the planet with us for forever. And I'm wondering, is there like I'm assuming there is an environmentalist kind of component to all this? For
sure. Definitely,
like,
it feels very much like
the ocean.
It's not as heavy-handed as that, but it is like, it's just one of the big things that comes up for me around having read this book is like, it's not surprising that it's winning awards and finalists for other awards, because it's like a novel for our times in the exploration of like, oh, we're getting into consciousness of like AI and other creatures, and also getting into these like ecological and environmental matters around human irresponsibility, greed, and indifference in the face of the destruction of much of our world. And it's like all that stuff plus octopuses are all on the tip of everyone's tongues right now. So it's like a novel for our times if you're kind of plugged into all of those aspects of the world around you and you want to get into that through this speculative fiction lens that can kind of take you a little bit away from our current circumstances and context and allow you to think through these ideas in a different way. Like, this is a perfect book for that, and it definitely gets into some of those ecological and environmental aspects. But I would say that is not as central as the exploration of consciousness.
Yeah, that's interesting.
You also nailed it, Charles, I want to say. You like nailed when you were just kind of discussing the aspects of this book that are interesting. You pretty much nailed it. So
thank you. Well, it presents itself well, and I get it, from like conceptually. It makes a lot of sense. It's very interesting. I'm a big science fiction fan, especially around this idea of are androids humans? What's the difference? Well, like, when do the lines get blurred? When does it matter? That kind of stuff I've always found to be very interesting. And who doesn't love a good octopus story? My one thing, though, that I have to ask you, in which this whole story my opinion of it kind of hinges on how you answer this question. Is there a mention at any point in this book of an octopus's garden?
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness. Because no self-respecting octopus book could not just ignore it. I feel like you'd have to make the conscious, deliberate choice not to include a mention of an octopus's garden. And then if you chose not to do that, then you're probably you're not fun enough for me. So like, that's the...
No, it would be a slap in the face of Ringo Starr, not to mention.
Absolutely.
Who you have met, Charles, or at least were very close to at one point. Like,
yes,
physical proximity.
Charles,
don't sing too much of that. That is not... That's not royalty-free singing you just did.
Yeah, we claim what we're not monetized. We don't make any money, so there's nothing to take. We're not commercial or nothing. Just do it for the love of the game and for you, the listener. Thanks for listening. So,
5 stars on Spotify.
That's good that they mention it. It's very important, and
they don't mention the song "Octopus's Garden." If that's
okay, that I can kind of let go because it's too cheeky. And if you're trying to win a Locus award, you can't be just like quoting Ringo Starr's songs like in your book, in your science fiction book.
Maybe John Lennon, but you can't go Ringo if you want to win.
Yeah, I mean, you have Lucy with Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, that like early humanoid that they discovered. Remember when they discovered that? So it's like there's
right. I do remember that.
There is that like you can pull from the Beatles for your scientific endeavors. Like there's precedent, but I think like quoting Octopus's Garden in your octopus book is too much. It's too much.
It's too on the nose or on the beak.
If she named an octopus Ringo or something, it would have been too much.
Yeah,
too much. But at least that you have to pay respect to what we know about octopuses, and you have to put the garden in. Like, you're just not an octopus book if you don't. I'm sorry. So I'm glad to hear that they did, and I would have put money on the fact that he did. But it's just good to have that confirmation. Thank you. And I think it's important fans know that that's in there. They don't have to pick this up wondering, is he gonna kiss the ring? You know.
I mean, I think that's just what the octopus's home is called. So I think that any self-respecting octopus enthusiast would include that, because it's just they include it because it's relevant. It's relevant that the octopus has a garden, and that's the like its home. So I think, did he kiss the ring? Who's to say? But he knows his octopus facts.
It's just, there's certain octopus tropes. You got to the beats, I guess you could say. That's what the movie people say. There's beats you got to hit in the story. You got octopuses. You got the tentacles. You got the squishiness.
Yes,
you got
tentacles.
The garden. Like these are the beats you got to hit in your.
It's
octopus
a low bar
story.
Low bar to clear that the book needed to have tentacles in it.
Well, it's an up and coming genre. There's still a long way to, like, Ray Naylor, you could say, is paving the way in a lot of ways for the octopus genre. I mean, there's opportunity here. Don't some octopuses, don't they have like camouflaging abilities?
Oh yeah, they can change colors.
Yeah, they can change.
And that's the thing. You come away from this book like knowing quite a bit about octopuses. I'm in a situation where Charles is like asking me octopus questions. I feel like I can answer
octopus authority friend now.
I'm as close as I'm probably wrong about some of what I'm saying, but the fact that. Yeah, I'm chopping it up about octopus's beaks. Like, that's something. So, I think something. Ray Naylor is definitely paving the way for like octopus fiction. There's a lot of octopus
That's
nonfiction.
A back of the book blurb if I ever heard one. Ray Naylor's paving the way for octopus fiction. The FDF
like how
podcast.
You called A Court of Thorns and Roses. A book that I would not recommend to my mom.
That's true. But
they should be using these. So,
they should be.
Yeah, he thanks all of these. There's a lot of like pretty notable octopus nonfiction books, and there's like Other Minds, The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness, and Metazoa by Peter Godfrey Smith. It's like, there's a lot of, that's 2 books I named. Metazoa, Animal Life is a separate book from The Octopus, the Sea, and the Deep Origins of Consciousness. So, like, he's looking at some of these, like, nonfiction books and being like, oh, how can I make an interesting story that includes a lot of these facts and tidbits? So, it's a perfect fiction read for those of you who are already plugged into this idea that like people are talking about octopus and consciousness, but who but Ray Naylor has had the will and the gumption to take this into the realm of fiction.
Ingenuity, yeah.
Ingenuity,
the enterprising, the vision, for sure.
Right. Like an octopus's wide open eye. He saw the possibility.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But anyway, it's the strengths of this book, I would say, they lie in the themes and how it is a book of our time, and it's like diving into, no pun intended, diving into all of the things that are in the public consciousness. And I appreciated that. I came away knowing a lot more about octopuses and having a lot more kind of like thoughts to explore about what it means to be, I guess, sentient or conscious or human. This is like how the headspace you're going to be in during and after this book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's just sits very uniquely and interestingly in the science fiction world. It definitely touched a nerve for people getting all these award nominations. But you mentioned that there were some things that you noticed about the book. I'm curious to kind of get into some of what you were referring to about some of the things you noticed that, you were like, oh man, I wish it was done a little differently.
Yeah, the things that I noticed there, first off, it's kind of slow to get going. And
it is chunkier than I was expecting. It's like over 400 pages, which, I mean, is not crazy in the world of fantasy, but that's a decent size. That's got some chunk.
Yeah, the book could have been shorter, I think, because it's a little slow to get going. And I'll also say even more so than the slow get going, which I can handle, is just like there's a lot. So we've got this main character that is named in the blurb. That's Ha Nguyen. Which also, side note, one thing on the little Kirkwolf here is like, Ha, I'm sure, like, a great name for, like, she's of Vietnamese heritage, and I'm sure that's a good name for him to choose for that sake, but I'm sure there's other names he could have chosen that would also be like true to her Vietnamese heritage that aren't one letter away from the word he. So that was kind of tough reading that. It was like, because your brain isn't like much like an octopus's arms. Like your brain kind of like acting on its own when you're reading through things, and you'll just like you're not reading every letter all the time. And I sometimes would be like, Ha said, and I was like, he said, and Ha is also a woman, so it would say she said if Ha was, a pronoun was replacing Ha. So sometimes if she was talking to someone who used he, him pronouns, I was like, wait, who's saying what? But that's super minor. I just wanted to mention that because it's part of my
classic he said, Ha said situation.
Right. It was a he said, Ha said situation for sure.
He said, Ha said, it said, the octopus.
Yeah, that's a minor. I don't really care about that, but it was just a funny aspect, like the idiosyncrasy of reading a book where the main character's name is Ha. But anyway, Ha is the most interesting character who's exploring the most interesting aspects of this book. She's the one getting in there with the octopus and trying to figure all this out. And then there were probably about almost half of the chapters would jump to a different character and by that I don't mean like one different character. I mean like several different characters, some of which would only get one chapter, some of which like pretty much had chapters throughout the book, and just none of them and what they were doing was anywhere near as interesting, and kind of like interrupt the flow for me of like this is a book that's interesting from the aspect of this scientist character is trying to learn things that I want to know about too, and then let's jump over to someone else. And it all feeds into these themes, and I can see what Naylor was doing when he's getting into all of that. But it's just like, for me, basically could have cut everything out of this except a couple of those chapters, like a few of them, just because they impact events later on. and they would feel kind of out of nowhere if you didn't get into them at all. But you could cut out almost all of those chapters, and we'd have like this clean 5-star, 300-page read that the whole time I would be like on the edge of my seat. But for me, it was almost like, okay, like I'd finish the Ha point of view chapter, and then it'd be like, oh no, like I have to get through this other chapter to get back. And chapters are super short, which I appreciate. I love short chapters. So you'd get through, it'd be 5 pages, 6 pages. Some of these, like the chapters that weren't Ha were shorter usually.
I've been there with books where a less interesting character, like Game of Thrones as an example, it's like, oh, it's a Brienne of Tarth chapter. Great. He's got to power through, I guess, till I get to the next Jon Snow chapter or whatever, or Tyrion chapter, or Daenerys chapter. I feel that. That can be frustrating, especially when the book already feels like it's kind of long. It's like, yeah, there's opportunities to focus in more on like just the interesting character doing the interesting stuff and save a couple pages and get the pacing up, and you're good to go.
Yeah, and so this premise that I read, the summary, was from the back of the book, and the fact that it doesn't mention any of these other characters that, like, in aggregate make up almost half of the book, probably 35 to 40% of the book, that's probably a good sign that maybe they don't have to take up that much of the book. If they literally are not mentioned at all that's mentioned is what Ha is doing, and that's the most interesting stuff. So that would be, like, one of my criticisms of this book that I largely enjoyed is, like, this could have been a clean 300-page book that always had me, like, really involved with it, because I noticed when I was reading Ha's chapters, I'm like, oh yeah, like I really want to know what she's gonna learn here. So yeah, there's that. There's also that there's actually less octopuses, like an octopus discovery going on than you might think. Like the discoveries are fewer and farther between. And maybe a lot of that is like we keep jumping away. We keep jumping away when we could be like just straight up in Ha's point of view. But it's actually not as central to the plot as it is central to the plot, but it's not like as much what's going on is like consistent interaction with the sentient octopuses. Like it is a lot of this other stuff which is discussed in the premise, like there's this corporation that's trying to do this, and there's other corporations that are closing in on it as well, and there's a lot of that going on. But I guess I was hoping for a little bit more like centrality of the octopus.
Yeah, I want more octopus, man. It's on the cover. Let's get some octopus characters. Let's get some octopus POV, some OPOV.
I mean, that's one of the things that is cool about the book is, like, it is emphasized, like I was saying earlier, that the way that an octopus would see the world and any attempts to communicate with them or what have you is, like, you're going to come from such a vastly different perspective.
Right.
Even if they're super smart and sentient and conscious and have created culture, it's like, how do you even relate? It's hard enough for us to relate to people even like who are fellow human but come from vastly different cultures and see the world differently. So it's like, imagine you're a whole different species that the way your life works is completely different. It's really tough, and the aspects of communication and what gets lost in translation there, it's pretty cool to get into. It actually reminded me of you remember that movie that actually was a book called Arrival, Charles? Like,
I love Arrival. Yeah, it's
right.
A fantastic film.
Right, so that's basically these aliens from another planet are interacting with humans, and they send this linguist, like this expert in that field, to try to figure out like how do we communicate with them. And there is a lot of like how do we communicate with the octopus in this, where Ha kind of takes the role that the lead in the Arrival movie was in. But it's cool that it's like, well, this is an animal that's on our own planet, but also there's that whole like, we know more about space than we do know about the oceans on our own planet. Which like, I don't even know what that means. Like, right? That's kind of a silly thing that people say all the time.
It's
but
what the ocean people say exclusively. Like they're the only ones that say that. The only time I hear that is in the aquarium, and I'm like, this sounds like ocean propaganda to me. I don't know how much I believe that. Like,
right, it's kind of silly. The sentiment of it, though, that like there's these passages in there that are basically two of the characters have written like nonfiction books in the world of the in the fictional world that's created by Ray Naylor, and like Ha has written a book called How Oceans Think that was kind of this like nonfiction exploration of like, what if there were like octopuses that could communicate with us and stuff, and then they turn out to be, and that's why she's like, oh, I gotta go study this. Like those. That book kind of gets into this idea of like the first aliens are likely to be from our own planet. Like this kind of arrival type situation is more likely to occur with just the species around us rather than like those kind of had tentacles too in Arrival, right? They were kind of octopus adjacent.
They were very like squiddy, octopusy like, and they had like the ink circles, and the circles were like frayed on the edges, and that was how they were deciphering the circles and trying to translate them and make their own to communicate back. And yeah, it was cool.
So there's a ton of that going on, like very similar to that, Charles, in this book, like including the use of ink, which is the way the octopus would likely communicate. So Charles, let me show you something the listeners can't see, which is why I would not recommend this book be read in audiobook format. I don't know anything about the audiobook. I'm sure the narrator does a great job or whatever, but I read the paperback and it had me thinking like, how could you read this in an audio format? Because as you're seeing here, Charles, there's literal, like when they're trying to communicate with the octopuses, there's literal like symbols in the book that take up like substantial portions of the pages that are meant to be
like illustrations.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Very cool.
I don't know how that's done. Maybe it's done really well. Like here you see, Charles, like some of them are very faint, like, but it's like, how do you convey that in audiobook? I don't know. It actually had me kind of interested. But for that reason, dear listeners, we're huge audiobook fans. This one I was glad I did not consume in that format.
Oh, that's good to know. So you recommend that we, read it over the audiobook for the sake of the illustrations. What I'm wondering now, we're on recommendations as we're nearing the end of the show here. Like, who would you recommend The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor to?
Well, I've been trying to... you always ask this question, Charles, and I always feel unprepared for it. But I was like, this time, Charles, I know that's coming.
And always coming.
But I've been sprinkling them throughout, is what I've been trying to do. So I'll just rehash some of them, like Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, the book that inspired the movie Blade Runner. I know you're a huge fan of that, Charles.
I like the book more than the movie, and the movie's like iconic.
Yeah,
I find it to be kind of boring myself, but
really,
yeah, I've tried to watch. I've fallen asleep both times I've watched it, but I've seen the whole thing. I do like it. It's just really. Have you seen it?
Yeah, I've seen. I mean, the first movie, not the.
Yeah, I haven't seen the other. I haven't seen 2048 or whatever, but I like it. I like Harrison Ford. I like Ridley Scott, but it's a lot for me. It's slow.
Wow. So that's a big reveal that Charles actually does not enjoy Blade Runner at all. I know you always get mad. Like this is like a Charles theme is getting very angry when he goes into a bookstore and sees that cover of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, like prioritizes naming it in some way like Blade Runner.
Yeah.
Like, which I get, like I'm with you on that, because Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep is a fantastic title. It's like my favorite title, even though I haven't read the book. And it's yeah, sometimes they will basically try to like call it Blade Runner and
Yeah, they'll
name
put
Do
Harrison
Androids Dream of
Ford on
Electric
the
Sheep as
cover.
like,
They'll say Blade Runner
yeah,
in big letters, and then Dungeon Team Electric Sheep is very little underneath it in like the smallest font
yeah,
possible. Like they just have to put it on there for legal reasons, otherwise it wouldn't be on there. And you're like, oh, the
yeah.
disrespect, the
It's
disrespect.
disrespectful.
So maybe that's tainted my judgment, but
I probably received like 3 texts from you that are you in a bookstore angry about that
it's
particular
amazing
issue.
how many different variations there are that do that exact same thing. I've kind of collected them over the. There was one I was in a bookstore. It was a whole shelf of them. I almost like had a stroke.
Yeah, that's definitely a big pressing issue in Charles's world, and I'm with him. I don't want to degrade his passion in there, but yeah. Anyone who's a fan of like Philip K. Dick's exploration, because there's other books that kind of get into that, right? Charles like does that other one that has a great title, like what's it called? Like
Which
the
one?
policeman something.
Oh,
What
flow
is
my
it?
tears. The policeman said. Yeah, that's a good one.
Does that also get into issues of like consciousness and stuff?
No,
No,
that's
it
actually
doesn't.
about like a late night host who wakes up one day and no one knows who he is. It's like he never existed, and he's trying to figure out what the
Ah,
heck happened. So
that sounds cool too. I
it
guess
is
Philip K.
cool.
Dick kind of like covered a lot of different
Oh
ground
yeah,
with
the Men in the
his.
High Castle, which is if
Yeah.
the Axis powers won World War II, what would it be like in the future? Like with a U.S. that's occupied half by Germany, half by Japan. It's very interesting. Also, a series on Amazon that it was good. I just never finished it, but I watched it and enjoyed it. It feels like a decade ago, but yeah. So that's a very strong comparison. You got me interested already, right there, just with bringing Philip K.
Yeah.
Dick into the mix.
Yeah. Once Philip K. Dick is in the mix,
You got me
you pique
listening.
Charles' interest. But I would say fans of that. This is a great recommendation for. I mentioned Arrival, which was a book, so fans of that book. Also recommend this too, or even just like if we're talking about movies, any of these AI focused movies, like the one that came to mind for me is Ex Machina. That movie, which is another good one, is because there is the android character that I mentioned, and I would say is more central to the plot than is implied by the back of the book. There's interesting stuff with that character. And I would say anyone who's been like reading any of those nonfiction octopus focused books, like this is really cool for fans of fiction who are already like, because those books are huge actually. Like that one,
Oh,
the
yeah.
first one I mentioned, that one is, I've seen it displayed as one of like the premier books in a bookstore that you see when you walk in there, and I know people are into that. So if you've been reading those, this is like, all right, let's see how we can explore that in a fictional way. And
Sure.
also anyone who's been watching My Octopus Teacher, anything of that nature, there's it's a great way. Like if you're listening to our podcast, you're probably a fan of fiction and speculative fiction, so this is a natural fit for you. And if you're interested in these ideas of consciousness and in like environmentalism and all of that, it's going to get deep into that. And but I'd say if you're like huge into the idea of like character development as like the most important part of books, which is usually me.
Mhm.
But if you need that to be prioritized above theme, if you need like things to be super fast moving, if you want this to be like a thriller, I've seen people like I read a Goodreads review that was like so mad that this wasn't like an intense octopus, like homicidal octopus, like thriller, which it's not gonna hit those kind of beats. It's slower than that and more theme driven rather than like driven by these intense plot points. So yeah, people are who don't think they would enjoy that and might find it like kind of ponderous, if most things are kind of a vehicle for exploring the themes, then might not be the book for you. But great book for anyone who's interested in those like nonfiction octopus books, who enjoyed Arrival, who watched My Octopus Teacher and said, I want more.
Wow. Well, like, what if My Octopus Teacher and Arrival just combined?
Had
That's
a baby.
Quite the premise for a story. I'd be like, I'm listening. Go on.
Yeah.
So, that strong recommendation, especially when it's backed by, winning awards and being nominated for awards and, getting reprinted and its self-published origins. It sounds like there was some magic that was captured, and that's always very exciting.
Yes. Magic captured like the noble octopus when they're put in an aquarium. Much like that Atlanta aquarium, Charles. I bet there are some octopuses in there.
Oh, there is, yeah.
Your local aquarium. That's which is apparently the best aquarium. That's what they say, or at least the best one in the U.S.
In this hemisphere, yeah, no doubt. It's the biggest anyway, so...
they got whale sharks.
Oh, yeah, 2. And they've got beluga whales, and they've got all kinds of cool creatures, including the majestic octopus,
Yes.
So, The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor. I look forward to the sequel, The Garden in the Shade. But until then...
There will be no sequel that I know of. But if there is, I doubt it will be called The Garden in the Shade.
Famous musician Ringo discovers that octopus have sentience and consciousness as he goes to create music. And what does that mean for consciousness as we explore it through artistic expression of music,
He has no time for that, Charles. Based on that video that he posted on YouTube.
I've too much to do. Peace and love.
Yeah, he has too much to do.
Love. After the 4th of October, no more fan mail will be signed. Peace and love, peace and love.
Exactly.
I have too much
Charles,
to do.
I mentioned you were in close physical proximity to Ringo, and you glazed over it.
We were randomly at the same party once. It was pretty insane.
Yeah.
It's the closest I've ever come to, interacting with a beetle before, and I was it was a great experience. So
it's closer than most come. But you didn't talk to him.
No, you don't, when you're like just a random person just crashing a party and Ringo Starr is there, you don't walk up to them and be like, oh, dude, I love Octopus Garden. It's like such an underrated song. And I think octopuses are due for a comeback in the popular zeitgeist. And he'd just be like, dude, I'm just trying to live a normal life here. So we kept a respectable distance, but there was eye contact. There was close proximity. So it was very cool. And that
was 2 ships passing in an ocean above
two ships passing in the night, or whatever they say.
Yeah, yes. That's what they say.
Yes.
Like that. Like that.
It was like that. Like there was a moment in time where our lives like kind of intersected. He joined the Beatles, toured the world, making all kinds of music. I was doing my thing, and then we kind of converged. we converged at one point, and then we went on. We went on to continue to do other stuff after that. But it was cool that for that brief moment in time, we were doing the same thing at the same time. So there you go. Ain't that the truth?
I'm
I feel
so
like
lucky,
I need to
Charles.
now.
I get to do the same thing at the same time as you, which is record these wonderful Friends Talking fantasy episodes, and we've just put another one in the books, if you will. So I think there's just about nothing left to do but play that sweet, sweet outro music, which we would do Octopus's Garden if we could ever come anything close to affording the rights to play that in this episode. Careful.
All right, well, Dylan, if it's up to you, I'd like to be playing the outro. on the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast.
If we call it a parody,
with you.
If we call it a parody, then it's fair game, right, Charles?
Exactly, right. The octopus's consciousness, the octopus is let's just play the outro. Let's go before things get too out of hand here. Hold on one second, let me get it queued up, and here we go. Thank you, everyone, one and all, for listening to yet another very exciting episode of the Friends Talking Fantasy podcast. If you like what you heard today, let us know over on the socials. We always love to engage with people over there, and that's at the FTF Podcast on Instagram, and at the FTF Podcast with a number 1 at the end for Twitter, which is slowly being called X, but we'll keep saying Twitter X for now. It still says Twitter, Charles, on my phone. Mine still
but
says
today,
Twitter.
My app says X. I showed it to you.
I know, but mine still says Twitter, so I can still say it. And maybe we say both in case some people's apps didn't change. So it's at the FTF Podcast.
This is going to place us in time, Charles. This is the moment. Like
this,
when people listen to this, they're going to be like, "That was the moment where it turned into X."
Historians will be like,
"Everything got worse."
Okay, we're getting the timeline. So. Yes, it's happening. It's happening, guys. Where we're going to be on the socials after this, who knows? Because it's Twitter's stars fading. So, but let us know over on the socials where you're at, what you're up to. We'd love to hear from you. But Dylan, if they like what they heard today and they want to support the show even more than on the socials, if they think X is a stupid name for a social media platform and what was once borderline of public service is now run by just another man-child billionaire who just tanked it into the ground. What can they do?
Toss 5 stars to our podcast. You can now do that over on Spotify. Spotify ain't going nowhere. They're not going to change it to like Y or something, some stupid letter at the end.
That
of the
would
alphabet.
Be funny as a brief press stunt, just to call it Y.
Yeah. So anyway, you can toss 5 stars to our podcast over there on Spotify. You can also rate and or review on Apple Podcasts. And review, you can write nice things about us. You can give us your octopus takes. You can tell us what you think about Elon Musk. Whatever you do, just throw us 5 stars above it. And that always puts a smile on my face and presumably on Charles's face as well. But just listening is more than enough. Thank you so much for doing that.
You presume correctly, Dylan. Thank you all so much. Just listening is always more than enough. You guys are the best. Thank you. And as always, go forth and conquer, friends.